Hello, everyone. I am Aydoğan Vatandaş, the editor-in-chief of Politurco.com. Today, I am joined by Professor Ruth Ben-Ghiat. She is the author of the internationally acclaimed book, Strongmen from Mussolini to Present. So today we are going to talk about this book. Professor Ruth Ben-Ghiat is an American historian and cultural critic. She is a scholar of fascism and authoritarian leaders. Ben-Ghiad is professor of history and Italian studies at New York University. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
It's a pleasure. So I want to start with the structure of the book first. So you distinguish the authoritarian leaders according to the way they are getting the power, regarding the tools of rule that they're using, and also the way they lose the power. So if we start from the first step, what are the similarities and the differences between these leaders regarding the way that they are getting the power?
So the book is divided in, it has three eras, let's say. There's the fascist era, there's the age of military coups, and then what I call the new authoritarians, which starts at the end of the Cold War, where in that model, usually they come to office through elections, and then they manipulate elections to stay there. But the book is an exercise in finding patterns in history. So one thing we find, regardless of how people come to power, is that the strongman leaders tend to have an appeal when a society has been through a lot of changes that seem too rapid to some people. So, you know, after World War I, when the original fascists, came, you had you had worker rights, you had there the fear of Russian Revolution and communism, but you had female emancipation, you had all kinds of processes of emancipation and progress, social progress. And we see that over and over again in history, and it's also true with coups. If you think of a coup, it's, of course, nobody's running for election, there's no advance warning, but you still have to get a consensus among the military or whatever kind of coup it is. And this consensus comes if people feel that there's been too much change. And so the strongman is somebody who he shakes up society, often through violence, but he also says, oh, I'm going to restore order. Mm-hmm. And in the United States, we had, it was ready for this after 8 years of Barack Obama. Some people felt he should never have been president. There was legalization of same-sex marriage. There are women admitted to combat in the military, lots of changes. So somebody like Trump was yet again an example of someone who was in the right place at a time many people felt they were losing their privilege. They had a lot to lose.
Mm-hmm. And what about the tools that are using? Have you ever seen some patterns in this as well?
Yeah, so I decided to structure the book in not only chronologically, but really the core of the book is an examination of these tools. And I decided to focus on propaganda, on corruption, on violence, the myth of national greatness, will make Turkey or United States or Russia great again. So those are the ones that I focused on, and each chapter goes over 100 years. And it was more challenging to write this way, but I wanted the reader to be able to open, for example, the propaganda chapter and see what stays the same, like personality cults, the rules of personality cults. It's amazing. They have not changed hardly at all over 100 years. And then, of course, what has changed, like now we have social media. And so what is the effect of social media on, what is new about it and what is old principles?
Right. So you're saying that all the strong men, all the authoritarian leaders that you focused on in your book have patterns, for example, like cult of personality. But, for example, Trump might be different than previous leaders because he was successfully using the social media as a propaganda tool. This is what you're saying. So, for example, when you focused on Hitler or Gaddafi or Mussolini or Turkey, so you're saying that these are the patterns. They all used these tools to remain in power.
Yeah. Now, I am a historian, so it's very important to say that the outcomes are different.
Yes.
What happens, we still have mass violence. We still have targeting of minorities. But we don't have today a Holocaust on this level, which came during World War II. So the outcomes are different. The biggest change is there's fewer, outside of communist states, one-party dictatorships.
Right.
That's an old formula. Today, you keep a little opposition going. You don't have to shut down elections. You just, make them fraudulent. And then you can say, oh, we're not dictators. Because there are elections here. So the outcomes are different, but it was very striking how one example of what doesn't change is that all of them, whatever their system, a coup or military dictatorship or a fascist regime or, Bolsonaro and even Trump, they're in democracies, they create these inner sanctums of government because they're all very corrupt. And the inner sanctum is filled with flatterers and sycophants and family members. It's very important with the autocrats. You have this in Hungary today, in Turkey, you had it with Trump. You have to have family members and sons-in-law are very popular, who are there to, because they can keep secrets, and it's like this kind of oligarchy. And so some people call these mafia states. And the other key is that the strongman is a bully, but he also can't stand any criticism. And so he has to have around him only people who will flatter him. Right. And I show in the book that over the long run, this makes for very bad government because they make stupid decisions and they start to believe their own propaganda. And so you see this over and over again. But this I didn't, for example, with Trump, who's ruling in a democracy at the time, I didn't expect to find such similarities, but they were there.
Mm-hmm. But before Trump elected, as a social scientist, were you expecting him to be elected as president?
I thought he might be. And in fact, I covered the whole campaign, specializing more on him for CNN Opinion. I was writing op-eds. And so the night of the election, like I'm not a professional journalist, but I had to do the same as they did. You created a piece with two possible endings, one for Hillary Clinton. But I realized very early that he was going to win. And I had started writing about him in 2015. Mm-hmm. And really early, because of my studies in fascism, I saw really early, for example, in January 2016, I wrote a piece about saying that if Trump got the nomination, and this didn't happen for 6 months, but so January 2016, I said, if he gets the nomination, he's going to have a personality cult, like Berlusconi, like Putin. And no one would publish this op-ed because it seemed very strange. Would happen. Right. Yeah, it seemed totally out of just not rational. So I only got it published because I opened a blog. I created a blog on HuffPost where there's no editorial. Anyone can do it practically. And that's how it got published. But this happened repeatedly. So I was able, because of my training, to predict a lot of what Trump would do because of this authoritarian playbook. But one thing, Americans, although there's so many people in America who are there because they fled authoritarian states, or they're immigrants from, they just so worldly and global. Mm-hmm. But a lot of Americans didn't want to believe that this could happen in America. Right. So there was a lot of denial about Trump.
So American people decided not to elect him again, and this definitely tells us something about the American society, American people, that they were trying to protect their democracy and democratic institutions. But on the other hand, we see that almost 50% of, or half of the society also were trying to get him elected, and he also was elected as a president in the past. But what does this tell us about the American public? I mean, does it tell us about the authoritarian tendencies in the American people, the American nation? How do you see this?
Well, what we have right now is like two nations in one. And something that is very different in America to other countries, and turns out to be more dangerous, is that we have only these two huge parties, right? In many other places in the world, there's many parties, and so they can form a coalition to block somebody. Here, and also it means that if there's a radical party, a radical right-wing party or whatever, they can be neutralized. But here we have that one party, the Republicans, was taken over basically by Trump, and now it's become an authoritarian party. Mm-hmm. So the split of Americans, where, Americans mobilized to vote Trump out in the middle of a pandemic and with, a lot of electoral voter suppression, and they did that. And I always remind people of that, because it's very rare actually in history that you can interrupt somebody like Trump. And in fact, he may come back, who knows, because they're never really gone until they're prosecuted. That's one of the lessons. We did that. Mm-hmm. But the people who we also see, on the other hand, he was able to have a true authoritarian cult of personality. And think about what it means that he was able to make tens of millions of people believe that the election was stolen. This is an incredible feat of propaganda. Mm-hmm. And so we have these two realities in the country today.
What about the second, Germany? So Germans are such an educated and secular nation. How do you think that they were trapped by Hitler? They fell into fascism and Hitler rule before the Second World War. How did it happen?
Yeah, the Germany is a very interesting example because, Hitler, he worshipped Mussolini, and he took a long time to get into power, and the whole 1920s, and he was not successful for most of that time. Nobody wanted to buy Mein Kampf. He went to prison because of his, putsch, and Mussolini was always trying to get him to be his mentor, and Mussolini didn't want anything to do with him because he said, "You're not successful." So it was the Great Depression, this crisis, because what strongmen do is that they proclaim themselves the emblem, the embodiment of a victimized nation. All of them do this victim complex. Mm-hmm. And so then they're in a good place if there is a real crisis like the Great Depression. He had already been building his persona, and as the kind of, I'm going to save the nation. And so that's what did it. And then, of course, how did he actually get into power, though? He was appointed by German conservatives. And another theme in the book, which is a sad theme, is that over and over again, conservatives and elites, business elites, political elites, they put these men into power. They help them get to power because they think that they're going to solve their problems. And in the fascist years, it was, let's get rid of the left, or let's, whatever the agenda is. And then inevitably, they get cast aside. And sometimes they become the victims of these strong men. But this happened even in, I was very struck that even in Chile, where you had a coup in 1973, you think, okay, well, but no elites helped except the military. But once the coup was there, the Christian Democrats, who were like the equivalent of the German conservatives, they actually gave their support to Pinochet because they thought that he would restore order and then give the democracy back. And so that, of course, didn't happen. So we see this, and we saw this in 2016 with the kind of GOP political elites and some business elites who backed Trump, even though Trump was saying he could shoot somebody. He was very open about his violence. And so you have this kind of blindness over and over again. And the first big example was Germany.
And what about the way that they lose their power? I know that every one of them loses the power in different ways, but what are the patterns? What are the similarities?
So the biggest principle is that, they never ever go quietly. They psychologically, and also because they need to stay in power to have immunity for prosecution, they cannot leave properly. And it's more of an issue today because they keep elections going, right? So then they fix things like Putin. Putin's solution has been, it took him 20 years. So it takes a long time to do this, but he's in a position where he could rule in theory until 2036. And Orban now rules by decree. Or in Turkey, Erdogan, he's prime minister and he's president. So that's another way of keeping rivals. Everybody finds their own way today because they don't have the old-fashioned dictatorships, right? So they have to find another way to fix the system. But, they sooner or later, they cause resistance movements against them, especially young people, because you can only be corrupt. And in Putin's case, he has a real kleptocracy. He's sucking all of the productive resources dry of the nation. And Erdogan is, they go after business. And this is a story that we need to have much more reported in the media, because this is, business elites think, oh, they're so efficient. They're going to modernize. They're building airports. They're doing all these good things. When in fact, these autocrats are going after businesses. And so slowly over time, many people grow disaffected with them. And that's when they sometimes do desperate things. So that's that was the most interesting chapter to write, was the how they fall. And of course, Trump, it was very clear he wasn't going to leave. And he tried everything. He tried to have military support. He tried to fix the election. And then at the end, he went for violence.
He was thinking that he could manipulate the Supreme Court with his appointments.
Yes.
And as far as I understand, you are hopeful in Turkey. So the victory of the mayor of Istanbul. So do you think that this would be a game changer in the future? Do you think that Mr. Ekrem İmamoğlu can appear as a potential candidate for president in the future? Is this what you see?
I'm not an expert on Turkish politics, but I studied that very carefully, and I wrote about it in the book because I was very moved, very impressed by this anti-populist playbook, really, that he used, and everything he did, and the message of radical love and going to the streets instead of, having these masses, the leader who has this false emotion. Erdogan's always crying, and yet he's always threatening people. And Ekrem did something totally different. And so this could be replicated. And now he had to go through a lot because, of course, Erdogan did not want to he tried to fix the system. So I found this very, very hopeful. Mm-hmm. I also find hope in the fact that many young people, it's really everywhere in the world, you see a lot of the opposition to autocrats is from young people. And young people they're the most what's the word, vulnerable to disinformation because they're online so much. But you also see that they're the ones, that's where resistance against autocrats always starts. And that's one reason all of them go after universities and schools, because they know that's where people start to resist, because that generation, they think, I have everything to lose. I want freedom. So I'm hopeful in a medium term that there'll be more of a support for a different kind of politics.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying that Erdogan would accept if Ekrem İmamoğlu would be the candidate, and if he would lose the elections in the future, he would accept the reality or the consequences?
I don't think he would. No, I don't. If judging from his behavior in now, what I've observed, and judging from the personality and actions of all the leaders like him, because they have of course, there are individual differences, but they have similar personalities, especially when it comes to if they feel they're going to be ruined. They act in similar ways, and they never voluntarily leave. So I can't predict what he would do, but it would be difficult for him. You call a state of emergency, which has been on and off for Turkey. I mean, it's been extended. And then it would depend what the people do, the grassroots. Yeah.
Okay, Professor Ghiat, thank you so much for joining us. It was such a wonderful conversation. And do you have anything else to add?
There's a new edition of the paperback edition of my book is coming out on October 5th, and it has a new epilogue that goes through January 6th. So, because the hardback edition ends with in the summer with the Black Lives Matter protests, and so the new edition has also in Russia with Navalny. It has some updates around the world, but also January 6th.
Professor Ghiat, thank you, Ben-Ghiad, thank you so much for joining us. Today I had a remarkable guest, Professor Ruth Ben-Ghiat, the author of the book Strongmen from Mussolini to Present. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.